Well, good morning, everyone. It looks like it's a little bit after 8. I know people kind of trickle in slowly here, but I'm going to get started. We have a great guest with us, so we want to be respectful of his time. This is the September meeting of the Darke County Chamber of Commerce Legislative Subcommittee. That's always a mouthful. And this month, we have Justice Pat DeWine with us. Justice DeWine, as most of you guys know, is running for re-election to the Ohio Supreme Court. It's an important race for our businesses and our communities. So we are thrilled to have Justice DeWine. A little bit of his background for those of you that don't know and didn't do a quick Wikipedia search. Justice DeWine is the oldest of Governor DeWine, 8 children. He attended Miami University and the University of Michigan, which I did not know, and I happen to be
I try to keep that secret when I run for election in Ohio.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm in Lansing right now, so I'm blurred. No one knows. But I did wear an Ohio State fleece in protest the whole way up here. So, and what I really like about Justice DeWine, you have such a great varied background, serving on a variety of different courts, the Hamilton County Court of Common Pleas, the First District Court of Appeals. Did you sit on the Cincinnati School Board at one point as well?
Cincinnati City Council and County Commission.
Okay, yeah. And then eventually the Ohio Supreme Court in 2017. So those terms are 6 years. So here we are, and it is a contested, all 3 seats that are up this cycle are contested, but these seats are so important, and I think all of us understand that judges and judicial rulings have a huge impact on business regulations and the business community. So we are just so excited to hear more about your race, more about your platform, more about your vision for Ohio and our businesses, and why these seats are so important. And I've also asked Justice DeWine to speak a little bit about 2 statewide issues, 1 and 2, that are going to be on the ballot. I think the more education on those, the better. So anything you can provide on that would be wonderful. But more than anything, thanks for being with us.
Great.
I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me. Just to talk a little bit about what's going on in the court. As Kay said, I've been on there 6 years, and to be honest, we've seen a big change in the court since I've been there. When I was first elected, we had what I would consider a judicially conservative court. What I mean by that is a court that looked at its role as simply applying the laws as written, calling balls and strikes within the rules of the existing system. It wasn't a real activist court. It wasn't folks who thought they should go out and make the law, that thought our job was to be policymakers, but people who more looked at the traditional kind of judge's role. Over the 6 years, we've had elections and the court has changed. And if you look at the court today, what you would see is that you have 3 people who you would, I think, define as pretty judicially conservative: myself, Pat Fisher, and Sharon Kennedy. And then you have 3 to 4 people who are much more on the activist side, who see judges as having a much larger role. This obviously is election year, and so this election is literally going to determine the balance of the court. It's going to decide whether we have a court that applies the laws as written, that protects public safety, or we go in the other direction and have a court that's, again, much more activist and much more in the, kind of progressive, so to say, when it comes to criminal justice and some of the things that you might be seeing going on in the coast brings those things to the Ohio Supreme Court. This is a pretty contentious race because the court, a few years ago, these races were pretty sleepy affairs. But because the court has gotten so tight, there's a lot more attention. And so what we're really seeing is not just, we're lucky people on my side, people share my philosophy. We're supported by the Ohio Chamber, the NFIB, a lot of the business groups, as well as all the police groups in the state, the FOP and the OPBA and some of the patrolmen's associations in different cities that have their own. But so that's, we have that kind of support. But what we're seeing on the other side is really not so much Ohio support, but people coming in from outside. So there's a number of groups out there who I think are interested in these court races. So Eric Holder has a group that gets involved in state court races across the country. We expect that he'll be really involved. People like the Soros family are at least donating to our opponents. And there's like some efforts from Hollywood to raise money. Julie Louise-Dreyfus, for example, who's you all remember for Elaine from Seinfeld. She's actually doing a fundraising drive for our three opponents in Ohio, as well as a few other judges across the country who she supports. So it's actually, if you would go to the Secretary of State's website, what you would see is, if you looked at mine, you'd see kind of what you expect. A lot of people from Ohio, about 98% of the people who gave money to me are from Ohio. If you went and looked at my opponents, what you'd see is over 90% come from outside of Ohio for donors. So it's a pretty marked contrast. So it hasn't started yet, but I would expect in the next week or so, with early voting starts, over a week, you're going to start seeing it really pick up on TV. You're going to see a lot of ads, probably from outside groups in the East races, particularly helping our opponents. So it's going to get really interesting. And unfortunately, at least from our standpoint, what we see is the polling is pretty tight right now. It looks like we're all a little ahead, but not by much. At least if you believe the pollsters, which I always don't. I don't always, but I think if you're a candidate, you kind of have to at least take that, run scared, right? So why does it matter? Why should you care about it? Why are people like the Ohio Chamber, other groups? Why do they support us? Well, I'll give you a few reasons. I think one is obviously the business climate in the state, and I think what people need is stability and predictability. People need to know what the rules are. People need rules that don't change, so that they can make decisions. If you have uncertainty what the law is, any kind of uncertainty makes people afraid to invest in the state. So when you have certainty, people are more likely to invest, to do things that create jobs that make our communities a better place. In fact, we know that in the 90s, we had a pretty activist Supreme Court. And at that time, we literally had businesses leave the state. We had lots of businesses go to Indiana, Michigan, West Virginia, Kentucky, all because the business climate in Ohio, the legal climate in particular, was not very attractive. I know for a fact that when the Intel deal was done, one of the things that Intel was looking at, that, may not be on the top of their list, but it was on their list, was what is the legal and regulatory environment in the state. And if Ohio had a legal regulatory environment they didn't feel comfortable with, they would have gone somewhere else. So it's really important from that standpoint. The other standpoint and is public safety. And that's important because obviously people need to feel safe in their homes. But also from a Chamber of Commerce perspective, it's important because if people don't feel safe here, they're not going to want to invest. They're not going to want to come to work. They're not going to want to shop. So people have to feel safe in our communities. I think if you look around at what's going on in this country, what you see, particularly in the coast, is a lot of cities where you have a lot more crime, disorder than we used to have, and that's really tragic. But it's also an opportunity for Ohio. I think you see a lot of people. One of the reasons that businesses and people leave some of these coastal cities and come to places like Ohio is they feel safer here. They don't have to deal with all the things they have to deal with. They have a better quality of life. But we put all that in jeopardy if Ohio is less safe. So community safety is very important. And from my standpoint, what I've seen on the court over the past couple of years is a really disturbing trend of decisions that don't support the rule of law and make Ohio less safe. So this is kind of a good segue into issue one, but I'll just give you one example. We had a case, and this is people ask me, well, what do you mean by activist decisions? And this is a pretty good example to me of an activist decision. So judges in Ohio, since Ohio has been a state, really, when they've set bond, they've always considered things like how serious is the offense, what is the risk that person will flee, and the safety of the community. I did that when I was a trial judge. I think virtually every trial judge we've ever had in Ohio has done that, at least in the past. Well, this year we had a case that changed that. So there was, it was a alleged murder out of Cincinnati. This was someone who killed someone, allegedly left them to die, fled to Las Vegas after the crime, and ended up getting picked up by the police. When he got caught by the police, in Las Vegas, he gave the police a fake ID. He tried to be someone he wasn't. He had a bunch of credit cards that weren't his own on him. And so the police arrested him. They brought him back to Cincinnati to stand trial. Well, the first thing that happens is a judge has to set bail, right? So the judge held a hearing. Actually, in this case, she held a series of hearings on what were the proper terms of bail. And this was not a conservative judge. This was someone who was a pretty liberal judge, but she held the hearing. And at the hearing, the victim's grandmother came in, and she told the court that she was terrified, the family was terrified of what would happen if this person got out of jail. And so the judge listened, and she always set a bail that she thought would protect public safety, as well as make sure the guy, if he was released, that he would return. So she set the bail, relatively, I guess, high bail. And so that case ends up working its way up to the Ohio Supreme Court. And so this was in January this year. And what the court said was, it was a 4-3 vote. So Justice Fisher and Kennedy and I were in the dissent, but a 4-3 vote. The court said that judges in Ohio, first of all, first thing this court said was it agreed the bail was too high. And so it agreed to cut the bail by 2/3 in that case. But then the court went on to say that trial judge, she made a mistake because she listened to the victim, and that judges in Ohio are not allowed to consider what victims say. They're only allowed to consider, and they're not allowed to consider the safety of the community. So that when a judge sets a bail, the only thing they can consider is what the risk of flight is and what the person can afford to pay. And judge is supposed to set a bail that the person can afford. And so once that decision was issued, that became the law in Ohio, because when the Supreme Court issues a decision as precedent, other judges have to follow it. So since January, local judges in Ohio have been barred from even considering public safety when they set bail for violent criminals. As you can imagine, that was very controversial. I can tell you all kinds of stories from across the state of people who've been released from jail on very low bonds and immediately committed other crimes, some of them really tragic crimes. I get texts from police officers, sheriffs, about things going on in their community. So that was obviously a controversial decision, and the legislature heard the same thing I did. Concerns from prosecutors, local communities about what was going on, and so they voted to put issue 1 on the ballot. And so issue 1 really just restores the status quo. It basically overturns this case and lets judges do what they've always done in Ohio. And it says when judges set the conditions of bail, they shall consider the wording in front of me, but they shall consider public safety. They shall consider the seriousness of the offense, the likelihood of return. So that'll be issue 1 on the ballot. It would overturn this DuBose decision from the Ohio Supreme Court and allow judges to consider public safety once again. That's on the ballot this fall. And then issue 2 on the ballot grows out of something that happened in Yellow Springs, close to where I grew up, but in Yellow Springs, some of you may know, a very liberal community. They tried to pass a law that would essentially allow illegal aliens to vote in local elections. This is something that's happening across the country in cities like Yellow Springs, and the legislature, as a result of that, has put issue 2 on the ballot, which says that you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in an election in Ohio. Seems pretty basic, but I think after watching what happened in Yellow Springs and what's happening in other communities across the country, they felt that was the appropriate thing to do. So those are the 2 issues. I won't tell you how to vote on, but they both kind of seem like common sense, I think, to most people. So let me just stop there. And I've talked at you for a long time, so I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about anything anyone wants to.
Yeah, thanks, Justice, and thanks for covering those issues. I think people get, a little bit ballot overwhelmed, and there's lots of candidates, lots of, local stuff, and then you get to the issues, and sometimes I do appreciate that the ballot language is simplified anymore, and I think that our issues will be written pretty well, but I think context and history and purpose and design is always good to have in mind when you're voting on these things. So I appreciate you providing our group with that. I know we have our sheriff, Darke County Sheriff Mark Whitaker, on, and I think he can absolutely attest to the importance of public safety. I know Darke County Prosecutor Kelly Ormsby is also a big advocate. He understands the impact that these types of judicial decisions have on a community's safety. I don't know. I know I'm putting you on the spot, Sheriff. I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in on, but I know you've been at the forefront of this issue, and you are the voice of public safety for Darke County.
Yeah, I appreciate actually you giving me the opportunity, and I appreciate Justice DeWine being on here and sharing his thoughts and giving us kind of a rundown on the importance of this race. And I would basically just reiterate what he said. And I want from a sheriff's perspective and a person who sees the victims of crime in our community, as well as witnesses and things that are involved, that how important it is that we have what I would say is conservative Supreme Court justices, so that when they get these cases before them, that they are interpreting the law and getting us headed in the right direction, rather than trying to circumvent legislators and bringing things to our community that is not in our best interest, I don't believe. And I would also say, if you haven't heard me say it before, I will say it now. That I am a big supporter of issue 1. I think giving the judges the opportunity in our Constitution where they shall consider public safety is extremely important. We've had our own experiences in this county, in my opinion, over these types of issues, and I'm hoping that this will rectify that and open the door for the judges to be able to consider those things. So I appreciate Justice DeWine's talk on this and his information. Thank you.
Does anybody else from the group have questions? Want to make sure that it's kind of just a fluid discussion. I know we have a variety of different backgrounds on here, but any other questions? And you can send them to Peggy in the chat room as well. I think one important change on the ballot this November that we'll see is that the legislature last year passed a law that will indicate what party our Supreme Court and our Court of Appeals, I think those are the 2 tiers, are. So before, again, and I can't tell you how many times my family members or friends illegally probably called me from the ballot booth, questioning the judges, who the heck are we supposed to vote for? But so they will be denoted with a R or a D for partisan affiliation. So that's a big change. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that sways or impacts these midterm elections. So Justice Pat DeWine and, as he mentioned, Pat Fisher and Sharon Kennedy are all on the Republican ticket. They do have Democratic opponents, but that will be clearly denoted on the ballot this time. So Justice, I guess I'm interested to see, I mean, how's the race going? What other issues are you hearing about? I know you can't discuss upcoming, docket, but are you seeing trends in the judicial system in terms of, business and regulation? I think in Ohio, and I'll give credit to your father, he's made it a very great business-friendly environment. I think it's a testament to landing the biggest economic development deal in the history of our state with Intel. That's going to absolutely change our landscape, and especially Central Ohio. I think it'll be exciting and it'll be different and to see. And I am glad to know that is a consideration that these companies make when they are looking at investments, and huge ones. So are you sensing or seeing other things in other states that are coming 2 years to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we see are a lot of things in the criminal justice area. This whole no cash, the whole bail thing didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, if you look at cities, like the California's, New York, what you see are, these kind of no cash bail, defund the police kind of ideas. And, this is part and parcel of that whole movement, was what the majority did. But what I tell people is I think the big difference is, at least in those cities, it's come from the legislature or prosecutors or people who are directly elected on those issues, where here it's not coming from the legislature, it's coming from an activist Ohio Supreme Court. I think you see some of the same things, or we're starting to see some of the same things on kind of the business side. If anyone goes back and looks at the history of the court in the 90s, what you saw was a court with some really decisions that were surprising to people. Some interpretations of insurance contracts that vastly expanded the liability of insurance companies beyond what they had intended when they negotiated those contracts and people thought they bought, which probably helped someone in that particular case, the plaintiff, but at the end of the day, it led to soaring insurance rates in Ohio that drove people out of the state. There was a period where the legislature passed tort reform, cracking down on lawsuit abuse because of some of these astronomical verdicts. And actually, the court, I think, or the legislature, I think three times in the 90s passed tort reform, and 2 times the Ohio Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional, threw it out. And so finally, after the court changed, then the legislature passed tort reform, and the court finally recognized that it was up to the legislature to make public policy in Ohio, not the court. But we're now seeing that issue come back up again. There's cases challenging the tort reform that's been in place in Ohio for some almost 20 years now. So those kinds of business issues are coming back before the court.
Great. And I know one, and it's not business relevant or public safety relevant, but I know that the Roe versus Wade overturn, there was an appeal here in Ohio, and it was going to go before the Ohio Supreme Court. They pulled it and went a different route. I don't know if you want to touch on that or how that will, or if that gets into something you just talk about.
So right now there's a pending case in Cincinnati. So, we're not allowed to talk about cases that could reach us, so I'm going to just pass on that.
Sure. Yep. No problem. Any other information that you're seeing? I know that you were just at the Darke County Fair. I know Sheriff Whitaker was with you there too. We appreciate you always coming out. And again, I think that's what makes these wonderful candidates. Your accessibility and your ability to meet with our sheriff and our prosecutors and our local judges, listen to them, hear their perspective. I know you interfaced with a number of our Darke County constituents in the tent that day. I think you missed the rain, if I remember correctly, or you hit it, right? You arrived and then it downpoured.
Yes, I hit it. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
We were in a barn for a while, so
Right, yeah, well,
waiting for the rain to stop. Yes.
that's a safe place to be at the Darke County Fair. But again, any other questions? But I think you did a great job kind of covering the importance of this race, the importance of these issues, you know, the platform that you're running on. As Peggy mentioned, we record this and we will send this out and make this available to a number of our members. So if we do have specific questions, we'll get a hold of you or Cam. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And you're welcome to stay on. I know we have.
Justice, before you leave, I do have to say that my husband and I are a Miami merger. So that's really important for everyone to know. If you know, you know, right?
I have a son who's there right now, so I'm having lunch with him tomorrow. So I'm excited to be driving down to campus tomorrow. So
yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks, and have a great day. For the rest of the group, I know Ben Thaler is on with us, and Ben, I'm going to surprise put you in the spotlight too. I don't know if you want to give just a quick federal overview. Sam Bain is also with us. I know so I will say from the state side, we're still in this, giant holding pattern. The General Assembly has been recessed since early June. They won't be coming back until after November. There are some different commissions and committees that are meeting these last couple of months, some listening tours that are going around on child care commissions and some other study groups. But by and large, our state delegation is back in the district. Again, great time to connect with our state reps and our state senators. But Congress in DC is now back in DC. They were off for August and kind of early September. But Ben and or Sam, we'd appreciate any update from you guys as well.
I can jump in here real quick. Thank you, Katie and Peggy. I do want to say I am also a Miami merger. So Sarah and I also met at Miami. So just for the record.
Yeah, I'm kidding. I know.
It looks like we will be passing a continuing resolution either today or tomorrow to prevent a government shutdown this weekend. Otherwise, there aren't a lot of huge topics going on in Washington, but I did want to touch briefly on two really important issues that Congressman Davidson has been working on in the Financial Services Committee. So recently, we've had several hearings with CEOs of the largest banks and financial institutions in the country. And one of the topics that they discussed, and you're hearing about it a lot on the news and in conversations with folks, is environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. So ESG, for folks that aren't familiar with it, reflects this new emphasis on certain corporate values in investing, hiring, sustainability efforts, and other decision-making for businesses. The concern that Congressman Davidson has is that these objectives are resulting in legal businesses, and I'm not talking about fringe kind of businesses, but like oil and gas companies, losing their access to credit or losing their banking relationships altogether, not because Congress has passed a law to make it illegal for oil and gas companies to exist, but because these large financial institutions are divesting on their own from these industries. And it's not purely being driven by the shareholders of these institutions. Actually, a lot of times it's being driven by activists who are pressuring the companies, as well as members of Congress, including Congressman Davidson's colleagues, who have grilled these CEOs on what they plan to do to totally divest from fossil fuels. And unfortunately, we are seeing decisions being made by these corporations that are being reflected now in policies from the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the SEC has a new pending rule, which we've heard from a lot of businesses in our district, that would require disclosures for climate-related reporting. Not because the EPA has said, hey, we need this reporting, but it's literally being framed as a service to the shareholders of these corporations who the SEC has deemed are deserving of the information of the climate-related reporting. And so Congressman Davidson strongly opposes this proposed rule. He's working to stop ESG objectives from becoming codified in the law. It's one thing for a business to have its own objectives, their own principles, and make decisions about how they're going to invest. But it's another thing to stop people from accessing their own money or from getting lines of credit for very traditional, non-controversial legal businesses. So how does this affect folks on this call? A perfect example, we were with a farmer 2 weeks ago who shared that he's not able to get a $200,000 loan from a major prominent lending institution in the United States. And his banker shared with him that the reason why is because their board no longer sees conventional agriculture as sustainable, and they've made a decision to divest from any new lines of credit for most conventional agriculture. And this is going to be really, really detrimental to a lot of businesses. You think about other implications, businesses that buy petroleum-based products like asphalt to make asphalt or things like that, or other chemicals. This threatens all of these businesses, not because Congress has said, hey, these things are illegal, but because of these ESG principles that are literally preventing people from using their own money. The other really important and very related concern is peer-to-peer permissionless transactions. And what this means is, if two people or two businesses agree to exchange a good or a service for money, that a bank or a lending institution wouldn't have to first approve that specific transaction from taking place. It's important because we saw a major payment processor decide that they're going to start coding transactions of firearms specifically. And it's not because, the concern is not because we don't want someone to be able to go back and say, hey, this guy bought this firearm on this day. The concern is that the lending institutions or that these banks will prevent people from buying legal products simply because they don't agree with the purchase. And it wouldn't prevent law enforcement from going back and finding out who made these transactions after the fact, if we can stop these kinds of limits. But again, the concern for businesses is you may have a lending institution or your bank say, well, you want to buy all that lumber, but it's not sustainably grown. So we're gonna prevent you from using your own money to buy this product that you need because it doesn't match our shareholders' values. This is a huge concern. I wanted to bring it up because it's a big priority for Congressman Davidson. I'll end with this. Our Military Service Academy nominations applications are due tomorrow. So if you know young people who are thinking about serving in the military academies and who have thought about seeking a nomination from Congressman Davidson, please push them our way because our deadline is tomorrow at close of business. So with that, it was great to see a few folks at the DDC's Economic Development Forum on Monday, and I'll turn it over to Sam if there's anything that he'd like to discuss.
Thanks, Ben, and good morning, everybody. Great to be back on these calls again. I was out for a little while. I had a baby, my wife and I, about 2 months ago, so I've been a little MIA, but it's great to be back in the office and be out at some events again. Quick couple things the senator is working on. I'll kind of give an overview of some things I've probably talked about in the call here and there before, but we're down into the last 3 months of the senator's term. So there's kind of a number of key issues he is working on to finish out his term. One of them is the Jobs Act, which you've probably heard me mention before, what should provide Pell Grant funding for some of those shorter term classes and certificates and classes that don't typically align with a 4-year degree. These newly eligible classes for Pell Grant funding would go towards in-demand jobs to help the workforce issue. So community colleges and our career tech centers are big proponents of this, knowing the workforce issue and that not everybody needs to get a 4-year college degree, but that we can help transition some into getting some other widely used skills and trades that'll help with the workforce issue. I've talked about the CARA 3.0 bill, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, a really comprehensive bill focused on funding and some policy changes to fight the opioid epidemic, fight other addictions, which is still ravaging addiction and the opioid epidemic. Fentanyl is everywhere. I'm sure the sheriff will tell you all about that on this call. And so we're that's still at the top of our mind, knowing that we were kind of set back in the pandemic. So that is on the senator's list to try and get over the finish line before his term is done. And then, of course, we also have the NDAA with Right Pat being close to Darke County. There's a few provisions in there that would help the base with its growth and whatnot. If you want more details on that, I'd be happy to answer questions. And finally, this is somewhat old news by now, but the CHIPS Act was passed a couple months ago that provided funding for semiconductor facilities and manufacturing. So there are two kind of components to that. One is the funding portion of that for semiconductor manufacturers. Obviously, that's big for individual or companies like Intel. The other part of that is there was another provision in the bill that was supported by Senator Portman that would open up some of that funding for suppliers and upstream suppliers as well. The senator was at Quality Quartz Engineering in Beaver Creek just about a month ago, earlier this month. And they're one of the suppliers to the suppliers of Intel. And so it's important to kind of keep those other suppliers in mind. Intel it's great for the whole state, especially Columbus, but there's also suppliers all around the state that are going to benefit from this project as well, which means Intel is going to be touching a portion of almost every community in Ohio. So we were excited to kind of get that passed and across the finish line. And in addition to that, one thing that wasn't included in the CHIPS Act that we wish was, but we're still focusing on, is the Safeguarding American Innovation Act. There's been a slew of foreign researchers and professors that have stolen intellectual property from universities over the years. That's going to be particularly important for some of the research and university connections that would support Intel and as well as other issues. But this bill would provide some better protections, particularly with the Department of Education, to be able to kind of stop some of the foreign gifts that aren't reported and better crack down on any research that is being stolen. That's all I have. Thank you for the opportunity to update.
Thanks, guys. I know you guys do a lot around our district and are very familiar faces in Darke County, so we appreciate that update and all that Senator Portman and Congressman Davidson do to help us here in Darke County. Any other questions or thoughts from the group? I know, Peggy, we were talking about the, just on the business side of our committee, we were talking about our state of the nation, or what are we doing? State of the state.
Legislative lunch.
Right, we were, right. We're not doing the two bifurcated ones. So
Right.
We're doing one legislative event instead of, if you guys remember, we would do a state of the state and then a couple weeks later do a state of the nation, and it seemed a little bit counterintuitive. So we are doing just one legislative lunch. We've got ask out to Lieutenant Governor Husted and a couple others to be the keynote. So we'll keep you guys updated on that. It's looking like it will be on Friday, November 11th, which is Veterans Day, and we discussed that, if that was a good idea, bad, but we'll honor our veterans there. I think we should still get a good showing. Other upcoming, our next month's call will be with Attorney General Dave Yost. He is also probably going to specifically be talking about a number of these statewide issues as well. He's kind of the face of issue one as our top defender and law enforcement officer here in Ohio in his role. So that's been a big thing with him. Him and Joe Dieters out of Hamilton County are kind of co-leading that campaign. Any questions on Pat DeWine? I know he's very conservative. He is very pro-business. I think it'll be interesting this election with the partisan affiliation. Midterms always kind of swing against the party in the White House. So I think we'll see that trend. But those races, to his point, I saw some polling, and Ben and Sam probably did as well. Those races are pretty tight. You know, you have to look at how the poll is done and how it was asked and who they're polling. And I think maybe I think the numbers that I saw, the last poll that I saw, maybe swung even a little bit left. They kind of over-polled the younger generation, which tends to lean left, and college-educated population, which is not in proportion with the rest of Ohio. And they seem to be up, but it's definitely close races in those 3 seats. Ben, Sam, are you guys hearing anything from your other counties on that?
I think you covered it pretty well, Katie.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, really that's all from us, the General Assembly. Again, I feel like a broken record when I say this. It's just a good time to reach out. So there'll be Lame Duck in November, which is, you know, just this flurry of activity. You know, after the election, it's, you know, 4 weeks of craziness where they're, you know, passing big packaged bills. So you'll see a lot of that. I think a lot will also depend on the outcome of the November elections, on how much they have to push, you know, what their numbers and majorities are going to look like come January. But there will be a lot on the docket there. I was talking to Representative Susan Manchester. I think she may also join in next month just to kind of give a forecast of maybe what we can expect in Lame Duck. President Huffman as well. But for now, a good time to reach out and to familiarize yourself with these our state delegation. So, well, I appreciate you guys joining in. I think this has been a good committee meeting, a lot of information thrown at you guys. So always welcome questions after the fact. You can reach out.
Katie, I just want to jump in on 2 chamber things. First of all, the Advocate is reaching out for ads for our membership directory. It's one of our biggest fundraisers of the year. The ad sales help us do a lot of things. And one of those things is our brand new, just sent out some information yesterday with the wrong date on it the first time, our brand new small business sessions, which will cover a wide variety of topics, from everything from business financials. First one we're doing is more on online marketing, to becoming a minority certified business, to tax updates from the state of Ohio. So we have a lot of great things coming up in the next year with those, and we're really excited to get those launched. And we're doing those in collaboration with Main Street Greenville, which is nice. So we have a good partnership there to get our small businesses connected in. So if anybody wants to sign up, there's no charge. There, just go to the website. You can sign up for that. So that's it for us.
Okay. Well, thanks, Peggy. Thanks, everyone. See you guys soon.